Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen, today we're talking about the one and only Turbo Toad token. Now, you guys know me, I'm super high on this crypto. I still think it is one of the better meme coins to be accumulating this cycle. I do think there are, some contenders for being the best depending on what you really want from a coin. But for me, this is the one that I believe is truly the best for the risk and the reward, right? We've talked about this before, where we pretty much said, yeah, like, something like Bonk is pretty solid. Like something like SPX, 69,000 or whatever, 6,900 is fairly good. Like those can get you pretty good solid gains, and there's a high probability. And for me, Turbo is one of those things, right? If those meme coins, let's say hypothetically, were like a 1 out of 10 in the meme coin risk department, Turbo is like a 1.50 risk. So, like, slightly riskier, in my opinion, but the reward can be three times higher. So, instead of aiming for a 7, 8, 10x, a 30x is still on the table for something like Turbo. Look, ladies and gentlemen, right? There's no need to sugarcoat things. Price action has not been good, has not been solid. Right, we had an absolute stinker on Thursday. Right, on Thursday we had an absolute stinker on the 14th, huge selling day, and that's because Bitcoin decided to shift momentum. Right, we can see that Bitcoin kind of created an institutional candle, and ever since then we've been selling off slowly. Right, momentum is kind of dying, right? Momentum is kind of dying, but we can still see that we are technically in a bearish type of trend. And at this current moment, there are zero confirmation signs that we will be reversing at this moment. But I do ultimately think something like Bitcoin should be looking to reverse sooner than later, at least back to 121K, where we probably will have another type of reaction. So I do expect some altcoins, especially something like Turbo, to be bouncing, and having a decent recovery. The thing is, ladies and gentlemen, on the higher time frame, we could technically still go as low as just above 0.0031. So if we even go to 0.0033, and close somewhere here, let's say in this green box, that is still going to be valid, because at the end of the day, the biggest thing that matters are the edges when it comes to the weekly closes. We can see, boom, over here, we have a close, boom, over here, another one. And if we were to close here, this would still be valid, right? We have a top close over here for the roofs at 0.0059. We have one at 0.0054. We can see, ladies and gentlemen, that we are closing in, right? The floors are consistent getting higher, the roofs are getting smaller, and that ultimately we don't have too much room to really wiggle around. Like we could go down another, what, 15, 20% at most, but that is like just me being extremely generous in terms of the technicals. Look, ladies and gentlemen, when price action started to get messy before Turbo pumped, it kind of looked something similar where it looked a little bit indecisive. It was faking out, right? August was kind of a weak month. It sold off at the very end. And then we can see September was a recovery, and that we went all the way up until mid October. So do not be surprised if something similar happens where we could still see potentially, the next week or two kind of just fake us out, and potentially in September see some type of reversal signs. Because usually, ladies and gentlemen, when the markets look the scariest, when they look like they're about to drop more, is when the fake out ultimately happens, right? We can see when we go back to something like February and January time, we were trying to hold for multiple weeks, but the pushes were really weak, and then we just slammed beginning of March. Then it looked a little bit scary for mid March, right? Mid to late March, it looks scary. Boom, we get a fake out in the beginning of April. We start recovering, and the next thing you know, April, pretty much the 21st, that week, boom, huge recovery. All of this data that was here for months, all of this worry just pretty much faded, right? It just simply faded. So look, ladies and gentlemen, right? Usually, like I said, when price action looks the scariest, the messiest, that is when things really reverse. I mean, it's the same thing, like I said, back in September. Late August is sold. The next 2 weeks look kind of fairly weak for pumps, and then all of a sudden, huge momentum mid September. And again, once again, look, we go all the way back to the beginning of January of 2024. Look at this price action. It is like disgusting. It is indecisive. And then all of a sudden, you get a big bang. So I'm not too worried. Right? I'm not too worried. You can even take it back to 2023 of December. Turbo was just slowly pushing, kind of selling off. Nothing was really happening. Boom, huge expansion, right? So I'm not worried. I'm not worried, especially if we go to something like, even other coins. They look very, very similar. Something like, even if we go to actually Cardano, right? If we go to something like Cardano, it's the best example, right? Price action looks a little bit scary back in 2023. Boom, it looks a little bit scary. Then we just get a huge pump. Then here, back in September of 2024, right? Price actions like, trying to be more technical, but then it kind of sells off. It looks very, very messy. It looks very messy for about a month, and then boom, explosion. So, not really worried, right? I am not worried at all. Especially that, like I said, technically we could still drop a little bit more. When we go to something like the monthly, right? Even if the monthly closes like this, right? If the monthly actually, like I said, technically closes above the 0.0036 zone, if we go to the weekly, how does this look? Okay, so it's a little bit higher. All right, this is still going to be good because this would still, as a monthly candle, be considered a higher low. So we have a low over here back in March. We have a low over here pretty much in May. And if we close anywhere, kind of like the way we are in August or even a little bit lower, we would close something like this. And that would still indicate that we are looking to be pressing up higher. Because the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, right, if we go something like this, close the wicks, we can see that we are getting squished, right? With the roof is very, very close in terms of the way it's closing, but we can see the floors continuously rising. So you really have to look at the details. You really have to be paying attention. And I do still, like I said, I still expect a pump sooner than later. If it's not August, it's going to be September. If it's not September, it's going to be October. Okay. But like I said, if this candle closes this way, then September is most likely going to be the month. And like I said, it's going to go up high very, very quickly because there is a lot of imbalance. Right here, we can see a lot of imbalance. And pretty much the next big relevant structure is going to be, boom, all the way up here of 0.008, upwards of even 1 cent. So yeah, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, Turbo overall moves in bursts. It's going to be slow. It's going to be annoying for some time. And then we're going to have a bang. And then again, the cycle is going to repeat until one day we are pumping consistently for weeks, and then we all cash out, celebrate, and have a great time. But that is ultimately it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy. I love you guys so much, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.